your representative is prepared to do a brief overview of the recommendations before we go into questions? Or should we go straight into questions?
Chairman, I think we perhaps can go directly into questions. Ms. Marsha Aline is the Chief Product Development Officer for the BTMI, and she's going to be representing the team, following up on the submission that was made by that department.
And I believe that Mrs. Marsha Aline is present here on the precincts of the House. Mrs. Aline, let me take the opportunity to welcome you to Parliament.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Happy to be here.
It is good to see you again. I have had an opportunity to peruse the recommendations and suggestions, and I have with me a number of colleagues who are both present and online. Perhaps I should begin by asking you whether you would be willing to elaborate a little bit for us, please, on the question of the cashless payment options that you have referred to in your body of recommendations. Before you go there, let me just say to you that in my mind's eye, I see the vending zones in the legislation as being an opportunity for us to craft a very state-of-the-art and very modern set of arrangements for the vending community, bringing them, if you will, into the 21st century with every modern amenity and convenience. And I think that the opportunity to have Wi-Fi in those zones is very important. Do you feel that the cashless payment options fit neatly into a set of circumstances such as the vending zones as contemplated?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that your sentiments echo exactly where we're going in terms of the cashless payment options for the vendors. We really believe that it's important that the vendors be represented in as much of a state-of-art type of facility as possible, and certainly having the cashless payment option would help advance that type of strategy. We certainly believe that the digital technology is upon us, and it would behoove us to have a new bill where vendors are being given the same type of experience that they had before. This is an opportunity for us to really set a new stage and to take the vendors into the 21st century. So we wholeheartedly believe that any opportunities for the technological advances, even in the form of cashless payment, should definitely advance as part of the regulations.
Okay, fine, thank you. And as we speak about going into the 21st century, obviously one of the things that we have to do is to be able to make sure that this legislation is as developmental as possible and facilitates ongoing development. I am heartened to see that the recommendation that you all are making also includes a training program. And I would want to invite you to speak a little bit more to that issue and to how you see it working with the wide cross-section of vendors that we have in the island.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. As you may be aware, one of the pillars of our promotions in terms of Destination Barbados is friendliness. We pride ourselves in being one of the friendliest destinations in the Caribbean, if not the world. And while we do ensure that we offer a level of, or exhibit a level of friendliness, reports from various sources have actually indicated that there's room for improvement in this area. If we're going to be giving licenses to so many members of the sector who we consider as the informal sector, who we all know that they're well-documented encounters with our front-facing customers, it would again be remiss of us not to ensure that we introduce a program of excellence. We do have a program called the Barbados Together Workshop, which is facilitated by the BTMI, but we also have the National Training Initiative, where there's a service excellence program as well. And we believe that that there should be some type of prerequisite or condition of attaining the license where persons are put through a training program of customer service. I think this will certainly help to enhance our position as one of the friendliest islands in the Caribbean, and it certainly would ensure that the friendliness pillar is maintained. We would further like to submit that in addition to having that as the initial condition, that it doesn't stop there, but it actually is a continued program where if persons are going for the renewal of their license, that they also have a period of refresher training, because we know that if you don't actually continue the refresher training, the things that you would have learned in year 1 and year 2 will definitely dissipate. So we want it to be continual and sustained, and that is why we recommend that the training program should be part of this regulations.
And I have no challenge with that. I would say, though, that if you cast your mind back to the times when the event called Festive Friday was done, I'm sure you will agree with me that part of the things that were observed at that time was also the ability to have vendors feel a comfort level so that they can, without being overly aggressive, be sufficiently assertive to be able to properly market their commodities. I would imagine that as you're looking at a training program, it will also be one which enables people to feel I suppose
empowered
yes,
to sell.
Yes, you're reading me. Because it has to be also not just about being friendly, but it has to be about able to move my merchandise without at the same time being a threatening or overpowering force. I need to be able to persuade someone to come and feel and sample the coral shells and to try them on around the neck, etc., and persuade them that it would be the most terrible mistake if they were to leave my stall without taking some home for the wife and the sister. And heaven forbid, I say this only for the benefit of one or two in this chamber, the significant other. There's a request. If you wanted to respond, Mrs. Aline, you have the opportunity to do so now. And then there's a request from the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, Mr. Prescott, for the floor.
Thank you, sir. I also believe that the element of service excellence has a component known as upselling, which I think this is what you referred to when you were talking about ensuring that money is not left on the table. And so we believe that person should be taught to actually upsell, and that will be part of the recommendation of the entire training program, so that they are able to very, very carefully and in a way that does not bring any kind of negative connotation to the visitor, but are able to actually get them to buy more than they perhaps had intended to buy because of the nature of the vendor and the skill of the vendor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Prescott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like a little clarity. I'm hearing the word informal sector being used. What I'm a total neophyte to these marketing terms. What constitutes a formal sector and what constitutes an informal sector? And if we are trying to build or develop, bring some level of dignity to the vendors in the society, and trying to cleanse it of many different negatives that will come from the criminalization, from the decriminalization, why should we believe that it still constitutes part of the informal sector? Because as a simpleton, I would like to know exactly why it is called, informal sector. It is looking through your lens. Just try to help me out, please.
Does this term, honorable member, arise from the recommendations and suggestions?
When the presenter was speaking just now, she speak about the informal
Oh,
sector.
I see. It was a term, a phrase that
Yeah,
she used.
yeah.
I beg your pardon. I was trying to find it in the actual recommendations.
No, I think she was
Mrs.
trying-
Aline, do you care to clarify your thoughts?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to clarify. From a statistical perspective, there are certain categories with which you can be categorized workers, and from a tourism perspective, the persons are categorized whether or not they work in the hotel industry or the attractions in tourism proper. So those persons are categorized as persons working in the tourism sector. There is a wider population, as we all know, that also are part of the sector that are not necessarily categorized from a statistical perspective. So that is the reason why we actually refer to them as the informal sector. But I note the sentiment, and it is something that certainly recommendations are we certainly can have recommendations in terms of how we recategorize them to ensure that there's no nothing negative in terms of the connotation of calling it the informal or the induced sector.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, honorable member. Senator Alfie Wiggins, you have caught my eye.
Thank you, sir, about that, for catching your eye. Just one quick question to Mrs. Aline. I think maybe Ms. Moore can correct me. I think one of our ministers is the Minister of Labor, Social Partnership, and the Third Sector. And I believe that vendors, from what I understand, as I said, maybe Ms. Moore can correct me, vendors are captured in that broad category of third sector. So that's one point. I don't know, Ms. Moore would have to help me on that issue. And when she finishes speaking, I'll come back to you, sir. Thank you.
You're correct, Senator.
Chairman, if I may.
I'm sorry, Minister Cummins. I thought, are you intervening on the same matter? Because Senator Wiggins had requested the floor again for further intervention.
Just to correct though, the third sector typically in this instance relates to service organizations and philanthropic type entities and not necessarily workers in this instance. And so the third sector under Minister Colin Jordan has taken a very broad-based approach of inclusion to ensure that the range of service entities that are supporting actual activity in Barbados by way of their philanthropy, that they are integrated into the governance process. So I just wanted to correct that, and with your permission, Chairman, when Senator Wiggins has completed, I'd like to revert on the definition of the informal economy.
Okay, fine. Thank you for the clarification. So I go back to you, Senator Wiggins. You wanted a further intervention.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I also want to endorse Ms. Aline's proposal with the cashless option. And she mentioned the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology. But you can get the Youth Entrepreneurship Program, who can assist a lot of the vendors and the new entrepreneurs. You know, this morning we were talking about the broad category of vendors, the name vendors, but in truth and in fact, these business persons, some of them are entrepreneurs. And we know BARVEN is the Barbados Association of Retailers, Vendors, and Entrepreneurs. But in terms of a collective noun, they're all entrepreneurs. And I do endorse the cashless society because a lot of the young people nowadays are using, I don't want to call the name because obviously I'll be advertising a bank, which I don't want to. And they use this payment option and they do it almost immediately online. And I think it would be a good option for a lot of these vendors to avoid the whole question of stealing or getting into trouble, somebody sticking them up after they're packed up at night. So I think that that's one of the options that can be introduced to Barvin and a lot of the wayside vendors, where as soon as you finish your transaction, you just go on your phone and you shoot the money to them, and they have the money immediately. So I think that is a step in the right direction. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Minister Cummins, you wanted the floor thereafter.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I just wanted to clarify a little bit for the benefit of the committee. Mrs. Aline, in referring to the informal economy, for the purposes of the balance, the capturing in national accounting, you typically would see by way of foreign exchange generation, you would see by way of taxes collected, revenue earned from various sectors broken down in your balance accounts, as you know, in your balance of payments, as you would know. And so you see that typically by sector. And if you are not necessarily functioning within that broad economic framework where you are engaging with the banking sector and making deposits actively, and those are the kinds of things, and number of persons employed, FX generated, then that tends to constitute what we would call the informal economy. And I think a lot of what is being proposed here in terms of giving the dignity to the sector that it deserves, putting the Wi-Fi that you've spoken about rightfully, Minister, in place so that there is the ability to then use cashless systems and also to use technology to integrate a lot of the current modalities for doing business into vending will go a long way, not just in giving the dignity and being developmental, but then formalizing, which for economic purposes has not necessarily been captured in national accounting. But also it allows persons to, in many instances, if you want to go to, I know a young lady now who wants to purchase a vehicle or in one instance she wants to purchase property, but because she did not have her business either registered, she did not have a business account, she wasn't depositing monies in her business account. She now has to, from the banking perspective, she now has to deposit monies that she was keeping informally into an account for a set period of time to be able to establish a business relationship in order to qualify for credit from a commercial institution. That is the formalization of which I believe Ms. Aline would have been speaking, and the kind of categorization that really now can help to give the dignity as opposed to a stigma associated with that, because there is a formal definition associated with the term. I just wanted to clarify that, Chair.
Thank you for the clarification, Minister. Mrs. Aline, I recognize Minister Humphrey, but before he goes, I wanted to ask you please to elaborate a little bit on this matter with respect to Clause 5 of the bill. The licensing grant should also include police certificate of character, and verbiage for the police certificate of character should indicate it is not for discriminatory reasons. At present, Clause 5, I'm not sure if you have the copy in front of you, hard or soft, but it is Clause 5 for the benefit of members, speaks to regulation of vending activities and the application for the grant of a license. And it says at 1 that the person who seeks to operate as a vendor in a vending zone, not a beach, esplanade, garden, or park, shall apply to the minister for a license. So you are seeking, as I understand it, you're recommending, as I understand it, Mrs. Aline, that we should add to this mix of requirements a police certificate of character. Can I ask, please, what is the rationale behind that?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, the police certificate of character is certainly not for punitive purposes, but to ensure that the committee has a better sense of who the vendors are. If there were any issues in the past, it should be flagged, not for punitive measures, but so that they have more information as possible. They said information is king, and I think the more information we have or the committee has on all the vendors, it would certainly stand them in better understanding.
I'm hearing you, but I'm not yet persuaded as to how that advances the interest of the vendor. You say information is king. I get that. Generally, that is very true. But I be getting information that suggests that, for argument's sake, a vendor by the name of Trevor Prescott was at some stage arrested or had some challenge with the law. Sorry, look, let me say it. A vendor by the name of Trevor Atherley was at some stage arrested or had some altercation with the law. How does that help? And I'm not being facetious. I'm trying to see whether there may be something that we have not grasped as yet. How do you envisage that helps us in terms of having that information relate better to the development of the vending activity?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we're looking at it from the lens of tourism, and certainly from the lens of a tourism customer-facing perspective. And I believe that the committee would want to ensure that if there is a person who has a history of in terms of violence or negative behavior like that, that they are aware of that person, and it may mean ensuring that the vending zone that the person has applied for, they may want to put them in a different type of vending zone based on the information coming from the police character.
I have a number of hands in front of me, and I believe that it is true to say that Minister Humphrey wanted to raise a different matter. And before you go, Minister Humphrey, that is correct. You want to raise a different matter. And Minister Goodenedge, you want to speak to this matter? And equally, so too does Minister Weir speaking to this matter. And equally, so too does Mr. Prescott. We have three people. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman?
I haven't gotten to those online yet, Minister Cummings.
No, Mr. Chairman, but I do have to interject because as the minister responsible for tourism and therefore responsible for BTMI, I did approve this submission and send it through, but I would wish at this point, this was something that I had flagged for my own purposes in the text. I'm not sure, I don't want to ask my colleagues to pronounce on this.
But Minister, you are speaking to the matter before your turn comes.
I would wish to take it off the table in its entirety, Chairman, because I do not think it's a matter that we should be...
Minister, I hear you and I understand what you're hoping to do. But equally, there are some members who don't want to speak to this negatively, as I understand it. In other words, there may be some members who see some value in it, and therefore you may be taking it off the table prematurely. Minister Goodenedge, could I hear you, please?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have a difficulty with it because, as far as I understand, I believe that persons who will be granted a license to operate as a vendor will be deemed to be self-employed persons unless they otherwise work for an entity. And therefore, if we have persons who are self-employed, why would a requirement for a police certificate be necessary? And therefore, if it's going to be taken off the table, fine, but that is my intervention. I do not see the rationale behind having a self-employed person being asked to produce a police certificate of character.
Okay, I take the point. Now, are there, just so that we economize on time, are there any members who wanted to speak in support of this matter remaining on the table? Because if Minister Cummings wants to withdraw it, then we need not hear the objections to it. It just will dissipate into thin air. I sense that everyone... I had misread the committee. Imagine that. So Minister Cummings, we are at a point where it can be withdrawn as a recommendation. The floor is yours, Minister Humphrey.
Thank you so kindly, Chair. In looking at the notes before us, I am drawn also, they're not numbered, but on the second page, or the back of the first page, where it refers to the revocation, suspension, or varying of license under Section 8. And the note goes on to say this should include specific reference to violation of the Sexual Harassment Act. A clause should be included to accommodate suspensions due to repeated complaints and after thorough investigation. Additionally, the bill needs to include clearly identified systems to better track violations that would flag repeat violators. Now, Mrs. Chair, sir, I do not know that we would wish in this room to associate ourselves with this either, because it comes from the same place, in my estimation, as the clause that is seeking to have police certificate of character and to cast judgment on people, sir, in a way that does not reflect what we are seeking to do. We are asking here for Sexual Harassment Act clauses to be noted in circumstances where we do not ask for these clauses for lawyers, for doctors, for bus drivers, for politicians, for police, priests, taxi men. So I am trying to figure out, sir, where this is coming from and what mischief we are seeking to remedy hereby. That's the first. There are two. And it's immediately after where the clause then goes on to say that this should stay up to a maximum of 30 days to ensure that persons who are being evicted can be evicted in the shortest possible time frame. It is again a language, sir, that causes me some discomfort. And I do not think this is where we are trying to go. So I would like to get some explanation, certainly on the first one, and why it is that we would try to reduce a person's capacity to be able to represent themselves in 30 days to the shortest possible time frame so that the person can be evicted expeditiously.
Mrs. Aline, I would invite you to deal with the second matter of concern first, which is the Section 19, relocation or eviction of vendors, and the matter relating to eviction in the shortest possible time frame. The reason why I asked you to deal with that first is because I am actually doing a search of the legislation as I speak, because there is some uncertainty as to the existence in Barbados of a Sexual Harassment Act.
Sure.
Sorry.
I just need to intervene in terms of... Please.
Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, okay. Mrs. Aline, while we just avail ourselves of some certainty with respect to such legislation, would you mind addressing the second part of Minister Humphrey's question?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. I believe that we would have actually inserted that recommendation as we looked at the entirety of the eviction notices. I think that there are 3 separate ones, and one spoke to for emergency purposes, and we were seeking to almost consolidate and show that the first article that speaks to up to 30 days would include if the person needs to be moved for emergency purposes, as opposed to issuing a second eviction bill. That was really the only mischief that we were actually trying to ensure that was captured.
Minister Humphrey, you wish to, do you have a view and response?
I'm reading Section 8, and I'm just trying to figure out what guided Ms. Aline.
Sure.
Because as I look at revocation, suspension, or varying of a license, under paragraph 8, are you reading from there, Ms. Aline?
But I also was looking at the the fourth and fifth schedule, where it speaks to the actual notices. And there are, on the fifth schedule, part 3, there's the emergency notice, revocation notice. And before that is the revocation notice. So we just was trying to almost consolidate as opposed to have them separately, so that the fifth schedule speaks to a period as opposed to just given 30 days.
Okay, Minister Humphrey has indicated that he wouldn't press this issue with you any further. I have to go back to the first one that was raised by him, which is the reference to the including specific reference to the violation of the Sexual Harassment Act. That is really an employer-employee piece of legislation. There's no broad Sexual Harassment Act in Barbados. It is really only a piece of legislation that treats to the very limited circumstances of an employer in his relationship with his employee. But the mischaracterization of the law notwithstanding, I think I understand the spirit of what you're trying to drive at, circumstances of repeated complaints and harassment and so on. No, I personally feel that all of our issues in this matter should be treated to by a Sexual Harassment Act in Barbados, which governs all of these things, irrespective of where you are and howsoever you're functioning. That's just me personally. But we are not yet there, and I would therefore have to defer to the broader wishes of the committee on the facilitation of this particular idea in this legislation. But I thank you for it nonetheless, Mrs. Aline, and we will reflect on this matter. Are there any other requests for the floor? Minister Weir.
Thank you, Chair. In perusing the document that was presented by the VTMI, I think there's some validity in a number of the suggestions, especially given the fact that in any service-driven environment, you want to reach near perfection in delivery. And so therefore, I would want to think that these recommendations may form part of a regulatory construct rather than be attempted to be embellished in any form of statute, so that you would have statute and then regulatory construct that can address a number of the things that were raised here. Because in delivering service, one must see close to 99% deliverable. And I sense that this is where the rationale behind all of this is. And therefore, I strongly recommend that this can be captured in a regulatory construct.
That seems to be very wise advice, Minister Weir. Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, any view on that?
Chair, I believe that may be best, because you may not want to hinge the granting of the license and then the renewal of the license on the training, but rather that there would be some framework. And of course, you have the National Vending Committee that can give recommendations as to how a training mechanism can be rolled out. Rather than have it as a condition precedent of getting a license and renewing a license. Thank you.
So if I were to distill from that, we would be then treating to many of these recommendations in here as being developmental in terms and intent, developmental in their intent, and that we would be looking at a regulatory framework which seeks to promote these best practices.
Chair?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, the thing is that you can have it in a kind of code of ethics, regulatory framework, The only thing is to, in terms of enforcement, but again, it would be the admin penalties. But even then, it really and truly, you just want to be able to sensitize people as to how to behave. And that can still be set out more in the regulations, probably in kind of code or guideline. Thank you.
Okay. Colleagues, I am guided by the recommendation of the Deputy Chief. Mrs. Aline, there would seem to me to be tremendous value in us looking at adopting some of these recommendations. I should quiz you perhaps on one other area before I go to the question of vending zones, and that is the vending identification cards. I think your submission speaks also to vending identification cards. Do you care, please, to elaborate on the thinking behind them?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. In the previous submission, we spoke about a reward system, and just like we in the bill, it speaks to violations of conduct. We would also want to ensure that persons are actually given a reward system for a customer-driven reward system when they give consistent, outstanding service. So the identification cards would actually help the customer to identify those persons that they are awarding that customer service award. And in addition to which, as we speak about the going into the 21st century, we certainly would want to have a digital ID as well as an in-person one. The digital one would actually be kept for record purposes, and the in-person one would help the customers to identify the person who's given that level of excellent service, which I think that we would want to reward.
My question to both you and the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel will be, how does this fit with the license itself? Chief?
Sure. Just to say that the licenses have within its format the actual photograph that would be inserted, and then there would be a vending license number and a number of particulars related to that vendor in order to identify that person. And also remember that there's a registration system as well. But it's just to the point of the identification issue. The license provides for that formatting for identification, and it can be presented on request.
Thank you. Does that sound as though it would capture the spirit of your intention, Mrs. Aline?
I think it would do. We were pushing for a little more, but we would be happy to accept that it could be presented on request.
No, I'm not going to I'm not going to say that half loaf is good as is as good as a whole one. Tell me what more you.
It is within the whole framework, Mr. Chairman, of customer service. Mm-hmm. One of the key things that we want to identify in customer service, that you should learn and know the customer's name and also introduce yourself. That is 101 in terms of wonderful and excellent customer service. And so if we are taking the vendors into the 21st century, we want to have state-of-the-art type of experiences where you have Wi-Fi and also other type of activity going on. Wouldn't we want to ensure that the customer service is at the point where it is, renowned, not just in Barbados but around the world? And so to have a vendor, saying, "Hi, my name is Mikey. I make the best jewelry in Barbados." That to me is the kind of customer service that we really want to take the vending to.
So what you're saying is that while the license is something that the customer may not see, or may, depend on the circumstances, actually see, what you're proposing is that the vendor would have an ID, which may actually be affixed to his shirt or whatever, depending on how creatively it is done, so that the interface begins with an understanding of who it is I'm talking to.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, we believe in the whole idea of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And if we were to have all of our, persons who actually serve in customer service in that framework, you will see the service levels definitely rise to a new level.
Thank you, Mrs. Aline. Deputy Chief, Parliamentary Counsel.
Chair, I was wondering if maybe the vending license could then be reconceived as a vending license card, in which case then you would fit all the particulars on the card so that it would be presentable, and maybe serve some of the objectives that are being identified by the BTMI rep.
I'm wondering if we actually need to do that. Maybe what we're being invited to do is, it does at first blush appear to be doing work twice, but I can see some value in what Mrs. Aline is recommending as a standalone, independent of the vending license, which everybody has to have. But what I think she's trying to take us to is a point where you are wearing in printable format, you have an identification. It might be something you wear around your neck. It might be something you put on your shirt, whatever. But
Chair,
it reflects.
Chair, but just to say that maybe you can combine the two.
I understand.
So, right, so that you can wear that card. You'd still have to, in the renewal process, update it and all of that, but it would serve the purpose rather than having a card and then the ID, because the ID has the picture and so on. But if you convert it then to the card, it would serve all the same purposes.
Quantity of information on a small space means small print. Difficult to see from a distance. But hold on, Mrs. Aline, are you there?
Here,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
So how do you feel about that? Because that's the flip side of this coin. You may want to put a lot of information. If you did it the way the deputy chief is suggesting, it makes life easier, I suppose. But the point is, you have a lot more things on the license than just the license will carry more than just the name and the expiry date and a picture.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
So you may have a set of circumstances where you have a lot more information trying to be displayed in a small space, which means very fine print, difficult for the interaction to take place the way you envisage it, because I can't read what is on your chain, or worse yet, what is on your shirt. I have to peer too closely to you.
I think it's important, Mr. Chairman, if I may speak.
Yes, please.
Certainly that the most important element is the moment of truth customer experience. And we want to ensure that the customer is able to identify the vendor. I think that's really important. The other areas are technical areas that the digital ID can actually assist with.
Yeah.
But I think having that, that the name of the person and that identification, I think will go a long way towards enhancing the customer experience.
Okay, I'm going to invite Minister Goodenedgel to share his views.
No, thanks, Chair. I wanted, as a matter of course, to inquire whether or not, especially for those persons who vend on the beach, if it wouldn't be appropriate just to have a sign saying approved vendor. I'm not sure how that would, if that would come into legislation or part of the regulations, because for persons who have an established facility on a beach or elsewhere, I think it would certainly help to establish that that person is approved as a vendor.
You have just made it a little bit more complex. I share the thinking, though, and I think I must say that there's merit in this separate and distinct, Deputy Chief, from the license itself. I think that what we are being invited to do here is to go that next step in terms of hospitality. where, as Minister Goodenedgel is saying, you could actually use the term approved vendor. But what you want to do is to instill that sense of confidence. I am meeting Ian. Ian is an approved vendor. I see his picture. His picture correlates with the face I see in front of me. And therefore, I can lower my guard and feel that the interaction is authentic, especially in the circumstances of some places where the beach is one of them. There are others where we have had some unfortunate incidents with regard to our tourists. Yes, Minister. Proceed.
Yes, and Chair, I think what it would also do, it would remove some of the obstacles and our doubts associated with who is approved vendor and who is not, especially when it comes to persons checking to see whether or not this person is an approved vendor, so that you wouldn't have any difficulties, one, in identifying it, and secondly, in invoking penalties, which would then, I think, reduce the workload of the vending committee as it relates to the proper regulation of vending.
And I think that the best place for this probably then would be within the regulations, as Minister Ware is saying. So my feeling, Deputy Chief, is that we should take this on board. Both Minister Goodenedgel's comments and the recommendations of the BTMI, merge them so we have an approved vendor concept coming out of it, and that we facilitate this by way of the regulations, which we will then have to roll out separately. Mr. Prescott, the floor is yours.
Sir, I just want to make a point. It's on the learning point of what it is we are trying to achieve in making all the amendments, listening to all the different perspectives. I was just saying to my friend that something that I thought was lost in my memory long ago. There's a sociological theory called the dramaturgical approach, and it's by a man called Irving Goffman and another sociologist called Tonnes, and I believe that the member Kurt Humphrey, in his attempt to expatiate on certain aspects in this discussion, I believe, whether conscious or not, Kurt clearly understands the problems that we are facing. Sir, sometimes when you bring the old jargon and mechanisms to discourse, what it is that we are trying to do here is to put all businesses on equal status. Tourism is not giving anything to vending. Vending and tourism, both industries hold their own specific and unique characteristics. And there's no necessity for what I call the same dramaturgical approach, theatrical approach, to come into play where we impose the tenets of one specific industry on the other, so that you deculturize the industry, which is vending, in order to get to ask for accommodation within the tourist industry itself. Because I think when we start to talk about decriminalization and sanitizing the vending industry, to me this is almost like a hand of arrogance. Nobody is sanitizing, decriminalizing, or in that sense. What we're trying to do is to give the vending industry pride and place. So you don't have to have any special tones, or you don't have to have any unique approach, because in order to do that, you will now have to deculturize and acculturize the industry itself. In other words, a vendor will have to behave in a specific manner in order to become suitable to be included or embraced within the tourist industry. And then you lose the uniqueness of our people, because you want to make an adaptation to what we consider is socially acceptable. And I feel, sir, that we have to be very careful, because we are trying to say, look, what you are doing, without people just imposing on you their views about what is criminal and what is not criminal. We believe that what you're doing, that we all accept what you're doing with a sense of pride, and we want you to feel equally as dignified. So don't try to feel that you can file off rough edges in order to make somebody look in a specific way. And I think that sometimes that is what causes us to make certain statements that people feel a little different about. Let's capture the spirit in which, when we felt from the beginning that this was an important thing to do in changing the vending bill, we wanted at least to allow a vendor. I'm not saying that vendor must come down the road with the pants tear out and parts of the body that ought not to be exposed, being exposed, because these are constructs that exist. What we're trying to do is to allow vending to preserve its cultural formations and still be incorporated into the tourist industry itself, and people respecting the vendors equal status as any of the other persons who are classified within the tourist industry. And I think we can understand that, or not. You would not even think about police certificate character, because that is the head thing that we try to avoid. If the established businesses don't ask people who deserve to show a police certificate character for such a document, I don't want to hear that we're doing something and then we're going to impose upon an ordinary man, bring me a police certificate character in order for the man to come and sell pears, in order to sell oranges, when the society itself has pushed the man already on the periphery, right? So I believe this is something that we all see, and there's things that we all hear. So I'm just saying that we need to, whatever we're doing, we need to capture the spirit of what we intended when we started about on this journey of decriminalization. And it might not be, the word might not be interpreted as wide as it should be, but that's why we're studying things like how do we expunge the records, the criminal records, and how we allow, how we deny, in fact, how we avoid having small matters that are, if there's anything less than a misdemeanor, how we allow a police officer to intervene unnecessarily sometimes when an ordinary officer, ordinary civil servant or officer can do the things that the police sometimes think that they ought to do. And we heard this morning, sir, about people saying they had to face all kinds of pressures unnecessarily. So let us, and probably it's unfortunate that we could not bring everybody together one time, so you would hear what other constituencies in the commercial society, how they feel about their role in the society itself. Because this morning, if you hear, I came here just for a short while, but I heard what the vendors were saying. And we are hoping that when this legislation is finished, that we won't have to face these things anymore. I just want to make that brief comment.
I thank you, honorable member. Let me just try to make sure that we're all on the same page. Your reference with respect to the sociology is entirely accurate, and the point is taken. I don't know that I agree, however, with its application. The certificate of character is off of the table. So I hear you on that. I share your sentiments, but that is not before us any longer. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. On the more substantive issue which is before us, which is the identification card and so on, I think that this is a developmental issue. And what the BTMI is pointing us to is something that I think we have to be mindful of. We want to develop this sector as a commercial sector. In fact, to use the language of Barvin's president today, we are businessmen. They're businessmen, and they want to be treated as businessmen. Now, in a sense, therefore, it is not only within tourism, but it is tourism plus. it is also about Barbadians. He also made the point to us early this morning, before you were here, that the tourists go to the vendors. And we know from the discussion that took place that very often it is the Barbadian community, not the tourist community, that has mistreated vendors. And the stigma attached and so on has been acutely Barbadian class structure being applied to the business of vending. I think that what we are being invited to do is to recognize that we have to enhance the sales environment so that those people who are from certain social backgrounds in Barbados that can be persuaded to do business with a vendor, but do not now do so comfortably, will feel a greater sense of ease. And let me be frank, in the west coast of this island, which I represent part of, there are people obviously who go to the beach like anybody else. And they see vendors on the beach as we all do. I am not entirely sure that they do as much business with the vendors on the beach as the tourists do. But I do know from my discussions with people that sometimes there may be small issues, or apparently small issues, like confidence that the person I am about to deal with is an authentic representative of the vending community. We've all been reared on the stories of the snake oil salesman and the man selling mahogany birds and so on. But that may, while we've laughed at it, that may have more of a significant impact on the psyche of middle-class Barbados than we imagine. And I'm being very real here. I represent some of that community. I must tell you, therefore, that I think that what we are being invited to do is to recognize that if we can say to anybody, Barbadian or otherwise, this is an authentic business person, approved, as Minister Goodenedge said, an approved vendor. And that does not mean that there are some vendors who are not going to be approved. That just simply means that you're giving them that stamp that says, I am Ian and I am approved by BTMI or whoever it is that I approved by, and I am on the beach. That person knows by virtue of the identification that you're wearing that I am doing business with somebody who is legit, and it makes the transaction and the arrangement of discussion, the whatever the transaction is, a lot more commodious. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve here. Because all too often, money is left on the table simply out of apprehension, fear, misunderstanding, a feeling that you're dealing with a bad boy or rude boy or something else, when none of those things might actually be true. And I think that is really the spirit in which this is being given. That's my reading of it. Minister...
That's why he tried when he started to say I'm not giving any specific plan.
Okay.
Right? I understand that. I also understand why people would put their views on the table. We said we indicate that it is off the table in relation to the submission here today, but I'm saying that it's still very much it's part of the psyche of the Barbadian, and we must always be cognizant that these are the things that we try to avoid. But I'm not talking about any specific plank in contributions being made, either virtual or present, or the people who are present here.
Okay. Thank you. I see Minister Ford and then Minister Cummins.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. To prevent you from getting vocal for you today and to continuously repeat yourself as it relates to this whole issue of license and special license, I want to say to you, Chair, I will alleviate that which will be obvious if you continue and continue and continue. And to say to you that this ministry that I lead, and through the NCC, we have already facilitated with a special license for all persons on the beach. So that is already in place. So that I think I can give you happy and good news, good tidings of great joy today, to tell you that that is already a system in place and it is working very well. They have a special license when they become beach vendors, and those licenses have a special notification that these persons are prescribed vendors through the NCC to vend on the beach.
But those are glad tidings of great joy.
Thank you.
I think then, Minister Cummins.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to support the comments made by Minister Gooding-Edgell, but also to really support what you said just now, Chairman, in your outline. You also happen to be the minister with responsibility for small business, and I think you, better than many of us, would know that one of the great laments in the small business sector oftentimes is that people start out in a given space and they don't necessarily evolve into the types of businesses that Mr. Alsop in his submission earlier today from Barvin would have referred to, where you get, you move from being a small businessman or a sole trader and you start to become the person who's importing, who's the person then distributing and wholesaling. That evolution of the business person is what I understand these developmental components in this document are being designed to lend themselves to. And I think part of dignity and part of removing stigma associated with certain types of activities is also allowing people to move in our own minds from where they once were. So the notion that I may start out one place and historically this is what it has been, and that there is no space to move and no space to evolve and no space to become something that is more akin to the accumulation of wealth as opposed to daily subsistence living is something that I think this submission that Ms. Aline has made in terms of the developmental components of it, those which were proposed earlier by Minister Weir and those which were just added on by Minister Gooding-Edgell, are designed to accomplish. There is something very special about the Barbadian psyche beyond those things which are negative, and it is the need to be aspirational, to be inspirational, and to always aspire for more and greater. And so I would want to associate myself with your comments from a small business perspective, but from a developmental perspective, and also from a tourism perspective. If you look at markets all over the world, and vending is not just done in Barbados, markets, artisanal markets are a huge drawing card for travelers wherever you go in the world. And they have evolved over time to keep the authenticity, to be experiential, to be that reflection of a local culture, but they have also evolved with modernity and with commercial practices. And I think that is what we are also hoping to do here, even as we deal with the important elements of decriminalization. Decriminalization and supporting evolution through development. I think that is what part of our important charge is here. And I would support everything that you have said, Chairman, and all the others on this particular point.
Thank you very much, Minister. So I think that we could feel comfortable in going now to the next issue, which arises out of this very useful paper from the BTMI, and that is, Mrs. Aline, the question of the vending zones. Now, you have outlined some of the areas where vending takes place in Barbados, and you have recommended that further zones be established. I just want you to be able now to take the ball in hand, guide us through where you would like to see the zones and why. Let me say to you that my mind is an open one, an open canvas on this matter. Believe you me, I've said before you came to this place that I intend to speak with all of my colleagues who hold seats in this chamber to get their input so I can be persuaded on anything with respect to the vending zones. I want us to be as facilitative of the development of this business as possible in Barbados. I don't believe that we should be pigeonholing people and that we should have a cluster of people, sorry, not a cluster, an overabundance of people in one small location. In fact, we heard today from Barvin the undesirability of that. But equally, we all know that this has to be done in an orderly and structured way, and we have to plan out the evolution of these vending zones. But identifying places across the island is where it all begins. So I welcome, in fact, this is really the first presentation that has spoken directly to the issue of what the future looks like in terms of the geography of the vending zones. And I would like to hear you on this matter, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Let me first start by saying that the bill does refer to a number of areas that we agree with that are good areas for vending zones, but we'd like to make some additional recommendations. And we would want to start off with St. James. We divided a number of them by parishes. So St. James.
You know, if you're starting there, you have my undivided attention.
That was not intentional at all, Chairman. That's just where it fell.
Fair
so
enough.
Weston is an area that we believe, we know that there are some challenges in Weston from an environmental perspective, but notwithstanding that, I think that the area itself lends, because of the high traffic that persons go back and forth and traverse that area, it lends itself to a vending zone. It could be a small one that is actually set up, but we think that that is an area that certainly could. It is below the Lime Grove, which is obviously well-established high-end shops, but there's nothing after nothing after that same area that persons could stop at the shop. There are one or two, I think, little boutiques, but outside of that, there's nothing in that area that that would lend itself, that person set up for vending. We do know that there are some food and beverage activity happening in the area, but we think it could be complemented by having a vending zone, a full-fledged vending zone. In addition, we think that Holders Hill, I know this is an area that we've long felt that needed some more activity. During the cricket season, Mr. Chairman, you would recall that this is one of the areas that is frequented very much by our visitors. And I think that if we were to get the community-based tourism going in that area, having a vending zone in that area certainly would have to be very welcome for the community, because we are striving for economic empowerment within the communities. But I think it would also help a lot in terms of
that is an area,
adding value.
Mrs. Arlene, that you don't have to spend any time elaborating upon. You can feel free to move on. The chairman has already noted that
Okay.
in red ink.
Okay, all righty. So the next area is the Cherry Tree Hill area. I believe that the plot of land that we're speaking of is actually owned by the owners of the Abbey, St. Nicholas Abbey, but we still think that the area itself lends itself to a vending spot, and we would like to lobby, to ensure that that is cultivated as such.
And if my memory serves me correctly, there has already been some organic development of vending activity up there.
There is at the moment.
Yes. Okay.
Spicetown, you would have mentioned that in the bill in terms of the Esplanade. Mm-hmm. And then we move on to St. George, the St. George Gun Hill Signal Station. Right now, people go there to actually view the Gun Hill Signal Station and to get the history of that particular area. But if we were to add, again, this is probably through the National Trust, but if we were to add a vending zone in that area, it would certainly create almost a multi-purpose kind of area and activity that persons would want to linger and not just go to the signal station. So what we try to do is not just look at open spaces, but look at places where there's a complementary activity happening and include vending in that particular area. Another such area is the Hackleton Cliff. And if you've ever been up there, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, it is a lovely vista of the entire Atlantic Ocean, and it shows Barbados in all its glory. And it is a very popular stop for our tour buses, cruise lines, and persons and going to see the rest of the island. And we feel that in terms of the community, that the community would welcome having a vending zone in that area.
For the benefit of the honourable member for St. Michael's South, he will not see the beauty of Barbados's coastline at the time of day that or rather the time of evening that he goes up there. But it is something that is a sight to behold during daylight hours. Proceed.
So St. John's Parish Church is and Parish Churchyard. We thought that both St. John's Parish Churchyard and the St. Lucy's Parish Churchyard, these are iconic churches in Barbados. And based on the history of both churches, I certainly believe that it would lend itself to vending in that particular area, even if it's not in the car park specifically, but certainly around the area. When we go on to St. Andrew, we felt that the area of that stretch of highway, from the Ermaborn Highway, Barclays Park, all the way down to Bathsheba, people traverse that area continually. Again, it's an area that I think is actually ripe for a vending zone. And if it hasn't been considered, we'd want to recommend that it's considered for that particular area. And then we also looked at Norris Castle. I know that you have the crane, but Norris Castle, when that development is completed, would also be a good area for a vending zone. There is a restaurant almost opposite Norris Castle right now called This Old House. And the surrounding areas, I spoke to the owner very recently, and one of the things that they wanted to do was to actually include the community to come out and play there, where the cottage industry personnel within the community, and why not include other business persons in that area to play their wear. We also identified Farley Hill, Chalky Mount Pottery, the Morgan Lewis Windmill. Morgan Lewis, again, is one of those very, very popular, iconic spots. And I think it would be great to, as a pull factor, to add a vending zone in that particular area. So to Six Men's, and then the trailways in St. Joseph. This is a pretty new development, but I think it would be great by the Joes River Bridge to have that a vending zone in that particular area as well.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Aline. I must tell you that I share your views. I wonder why you would have left out the area around Harrison Cave. But I suspect that that is going to be subject to its own developmental thrust distinctly and separately anyhow. So the leader of the opposition draws to my attention Folkestone, which again is a fair point. But I think that none of us are really going to be able to, off the top of our heads, to identify an exhaustive list. I think that Barbados really is in a unique position where we can facilitate the development of vending in several areas. And every area probably lends itself to certain unique features and about the way in which we approach this business. But I thank you for the recommendations. Now, I think you sold yourself a little bit short. I'm going to, before I finish, the honorable member for St. Michael East wanted to intervene.
Oh, I just want to ask a question. Are these locations already, well, the locations are there, but is the dynamics of a market already functioning in the specific locations mentioned here? Or this is a case where they...
In some cases,
right,
yes.
They have the foresight and believe that if this is not a season, I don't want it to be a season. I would like to see us concentrating heavily on seasonal exercises. That when the hotel season is going, unless you have a hotel season in the future, that almost will be all year round. I would like us to be set up a big zone in a specific area, and with just a few vendors go there, it becomes a market for a specific time, right? Even as a tourist. When I say that, I was thinking about what station name, no? The Gun Hill Signal Station, and what is going to be happening up there, and then what is happening right around that Jarrow Bridge. There's a natural market evolving, just a little distance away from the signal station, and to have a vending zone up there, I'm just saying that it is likely to only cater to people mostly in the season itself. I'm not saying that I'm right or that I'm perfect, but I just say that you might have to take some of these things into consideration.
It is a very legitimate observation.
Right? Because the one down by the church and that whole development there, the activities are there all the time.
I see you, Senator Wiggins. Bear with me, please. Yes, and that's the point. This reflects a perspective from the tourism sector about what I think. Obviously, we have to have a cross-fertilization of views on these. Yes.
From my perspective as a parliamentary representative, I would like to know that if there are specific zones, I will be given some level of priority.
And indeed, that is why I said, I prefaced my remarks, Honourable Member, by saying that I will engage with every sitting member, including the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, so that we can get the benefit of his input. But I do think that there is merit in us trying to go through the rigors of this exercise and identifying areas. And truth to tell, even from the tourism perspective, I think that the mission or the outline perhaps would have benefited if it also included Folkestone Park. We, however, are not going to be able to just, as I said, in any one place very easily have an exhaustive and full list. What I wanted us to also focus on, though, Mrs. Arlene, was the rest of your ideas. I think that you had spoken to some developmental issues that must be attending, especially these rural zones. If we are doing it in the context of tourism, and yes, even if we're doing it in the context of local traffic, we want Barbadians to see more of Barbados. We want Barbadians to participate in more things that are more beverages that are being drunk, more food that is being produced and sold. And we want Barbadians to be more involved in the business communities of Barbados and in the culture of the island. Now, you raised some very interesting issues in your paper, which I thought you would have gone to. The adequacy of signage and those attendant matters. Would you like to elaborate on them, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to say that the first visitor that we have, or the first tourist that we have, is a domestic tourist. That means that's a Barbadian. And so whatever we do, we have to ensure that it's set in a Barbadian context before we even look at an external visitor. And the Barbadian wants to enjoy the same types of establishments that the visitor does want to enjoy. And so if we have these vending zones, we'd want to ensure that the vending zones are, first of all, accessible, not just in terms of accessible by the ordinary person, but let's look at the whole idea of inclusivity. One of the challenges that we have had as a destination is that we say we are an inclusive destination in terms of we cater for the disabled, but we know that we still have some challenges in terms of persons who are in wheelchairs going into Bridgetown, going into some of the national, the attractions and the parks and things like that. So if we are going to do a vending zone, we should again start right by ensuring that it's accessible to all. We would want to ensure that it's accompanied by public restrooms. We'd want to know that the vendors have some place to wash their hands and do their business, and also for the public as well. And we would want to ensure that it has free Wi-Fi. There's nothing that's a bigger drawing card right now than some place that has free Wi-Fi. And as we talk about the whole idea of the paperless or the cashless systems, the free Wi-Fi would also help in terms of ensuring that those transactions are able to go through as painless as possible. The informational and directional signage is something that we at the BTMI are looking at very, very much all across the destination. But specifically, if we're going to have these vending zones, we should have signage, not just directional signage, but digitalized signage that can tell you what's happening in Barbados, what's happening around the corner, information of interest to the island and the destination, and that would really, in terms of helping to ensure that we very much transport ourselves in the 21st century from a vending perspective, those are the kind of things that we'd want to ensure that we do. The other intervention that we had is that we would want to recommend that the vending zones be specific to the area. So we may we purpose a particular vending zone to say this is where, if you want the best artifacts in Barbados or the best arts and craft, this is where you should go. If you want jewelry, this is the place to go. And Mr. Chairman, one of the challenges that we have across the destination is that very often when we're looking for, this is us as Barbadians now, when we're looking for souvenirs to give to our visitors or to our friends overseas, we have to dig deep and dark to find those souvenirs. And we should have ready at the top of our mind places that we could send persons to that we can say, if you want to get, X and it's authentic, you'll get a fantastic experience, this is where you should be going.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Aline. Senator Wiggins had asked for the floor, and then after that, Minister Cummins, you caught my eye. So I'll allow Senator Wiggins to go first, and then you after, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the recommendations given by Mrs. Aline, if we're going to have consultations with the established businesses in the areas first to avoid the type of conflict which the vendor spoke about this morning. Because, some of them said that if they set up close to some businesses, they say that they are blocking their doors, and that's why the police had to be called in. So some of the business places that I see outlined here, some of the zones, would be close to established businesses. But these vending zones, I would imagine, if they're going to be set up in association with the government, it should be eliminating those type of issues. So that's one of the things I want to talk about. And obviously, like I said, I've been saying from day one, an area where I personally would like to see vending zone set up will be along the ABC highway, and it would be with all the amenities in terms of bathrooms, Wi-Fi, storage, ice, and everything. So along the ABC highway, and at least you get visitors on their way to the Grantley Adams Airport would pass the ABC highway to get there. And if I have even selected one of the places that I think would be a good place off the highway, where you can pull off the highway, park properly, go to the vendors, and then get back in your taxi and go ahead to the airport. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wiggins. Minister Cummins.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to respond to your query about the absence of signage and so on from in this paper. Just to say that we have just completed a significant body of work auditing product and the status of product in the post once the country opened back up, and that report is now with the ministry. And that report will be coming up as part of a comprehensive rehabilitation program, which does include signage and the integration of the vending zones that you ultimately and the committee will identify if they are connected to and related to the tourism sector. So just to make the point that when we're talking about setting up of zones, Ms. Aline, when she was speaking, she made reference to the fact that the first visitor is a local. So we are going to have to make some determinations, and I'm confident in your leadership on this and that of the members of the committee, that you will be able to differentiate what specific segment of the market each vending zone will be catering to. There will be those that will cater to both locals and visitors. There will be those that will cater to visitors generally visiting an attraction. There will be those that will be supporting community-driven entrepreneurship where people who are passing through the area will be able to access. There will be those specialized locations where if I want to be able to go and buy pottery, I know where I can find that. And if I want to be able to find basketry, I know where I can find that, and at the highest possible level. So I have confidence in the work of the committee, but just to say that we will be coming from the tourism perspective with a far more comprehensive approach through the respective organs of cabinet and onward. So you can look forward to that, including signage, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Minister. I am not seeing any other hands being raised, and we had come to that hour where we were going to break for the day. As I made the arrangements, or before I made the arrangements for Friday, let me thank you, Mrs. Aline, and you also, Minister Cummins. I think it's been a very useful presentation. Mrs. Aline, truth to tell, the perspective has taken us broadly across the island, and that is vitally important for spatial balance. I need not tell you, you know very well that the consolidation of business opportunities in one or two small confines or corridors of the island really does not do any good for the broader economic development of vending or any other type of business enterprise in Barbados. And frankly speaking, from a tourism perspective, it's very damaging because you have the consequential effect of over-tourism and the saturation of hundreds and thousands of people doing business and making visits and so on in one area, as opposed to spreading that across the length and breadth of Barbados. So I thought it was very useful. And again, we will come to a point in the not too distant future where we settle on a number of vending zones and we begin to roll them out. But at least now we have a perspective from the tourism side that allows us to factor this into the equation. And I am indebted to you for that. Colleagues, with respect to Friday, I am hoping that we can have a number of people present. As Minister Gooden-Edgell rejoins us, I wanted to invite him to indicate whether he thinks it is feasible that we have the technical officials from MTW participate on Friday morning. I think what I would want to hear from them and what the committee would probably wish to quiz them on is the usage of the highway for vending and how we can best accommodate the idea of vending zones along the highway in particular, but other places as well. The other entity that I would want to have, but I'm not, is Minister Humphrey. I know he's okay. I wanted to get the manager of fisheries markets. What is the correct title? Senior manager of markets for Friday as well. I didn't want us to settle on that in the absence of Minister Humphrey, but the truth of the matter is that I think we do need to have both him and the supervisor of markets from the Ministry of Agriculture side present, so that we can satisfy ourselves as to the capacity that now exists and what might be necessary to be implemented before we can have the legislation proclaimed. Now, we don't have up to this point, colleagues, any other written submissions other than that from Ambassador Commisson, and I would want to urge that we invite him for Friday as well. He has already indicated that he is pressed, but I have read his submissions, and I believe that we could treat to them fairly effectively without having taken up too much of his time.
Mr. Chair,
but let me just finish, please.
okay.
We come on the 15th of October. That is the last date by which submissions can be made. And thereafter, we have to plan out the life of this committee. I would want to think that as we go forward, next week, Monday, I am mindful of the fact that we have a joint sitting of the Houses of Parliament with a view to determining the presidency of the Republic, and that's on the 20th of this month. I would want to think, Madam Clerk, that we could work on Monday at least for half of the day, because I know that there's going to be a need to move this place physically, equipment physically, to the conference center, and then bring it back. And setting up, testing, et cetera, ensuring compatibility with their arrangements and ours is going to take probably a day on either side, at least. So I'm just trying to front load the amount of work that we do. I beg your pardon? Well, I don't want to, yeah, Tuesday might be a little difficult. So I'm thinking, therefore, that we should try to treat as many witnesses as possible during the course of Friday. So I've said a lot simply to say that depending on what the Clerk of the House can do and can put in place, I would ask you all to prepare for a robust day on Friday, which would probably take us a little later into the evening than we are now. And I would like for us to start as punctually as possible on Friday morning so that we can properly execute the business of the committee. Minister Humphrey, before I hear Mr. Prescott, I wanted you to advise, if you can, as to the possibility of the senior manager for markets being able to attend the committee's business on Friday morning.
Yes, he'll be here. I spoke to him earlier. He was actually looking for a link for today, but if he's invited, he'll be here on Friday.
Okay. He'll be welcome in person. And kindly reach out to the Ministry of Agriculture with a similar view with respect to the supervisor of markets. Manager markets. Mr. Prescott?
No, I would just say that, unfortunately, today, Barbados Tourism Marketing did not put on the table a clear view on community tourism. I think that I've seen attempts before made of community tourism, which obviously relates to a lot of vending and cultural activities as well. And I don't know if you can tackle it from the perspective of community development or some other government agency that can give us an idea of a paradigm of what community tourism could be like, and at least them also incorporate vending stalls, and both food stalls and cultural activities and everything in the specific area like that. So I'm just trying to see if we can integrate the whole concept of community development, tourism, vending, and everything. Because when I looked at what we were seeing here, our reflection, a lot of these things were driven by the interest of traditional tourism approaches to developing vending markets and so on. So I was just wondering if we could not get a perspective from them, even if it comes in another paper, or if community development could not say this is what we are thinking in terms of developing markets. Personally, as I said to you before, sir, I am seeing markets developing, vending markets developing across the community.
Organically.
Right, organically. And I would love to see a planned program. You know, you wouldn't stop the community, the involvement, but one of the agencies could at least make a presentation on something of that nature. It's something that we need to think about.
Okay, your point is taken.
That's a submission from community development or some agency or tourism.
Minister Cummins, are you still there?
I am, Chairman, and I just wanted to make the point that I did indicate just a short while ago when I spoke last that we are we have just completed, I did say this earlier, that we have just completed a complete audit of the tourism attractions and our product, and that we will be coming to Cabinet and the other agencies with a full presentation. That would not have been presented in this context, Chairman, but that is very much one of the things that we will be presenting. I believe it's meant to come up to Cabinet next week, Thursday.
Right, fine, thank you. I think that Minister, Honorable Member, your views are with merit. We will have to have some discussions as to how we treat community vending within the context of community touristic experiences. So, colleagues, I think I've said all that I need to say about what we anticipate to do on Friday. Minister Ford and Minister Humphrey, I want to emphasize that the challenge we have is that because of the election of the President of the Republic, we will have next week a very difficult experience in terms of being able to have the amount of meetings that we had scheduled, for example, for this week. And then the commitment that I had given at the very beginning was that we would be, by the following week, allowing for the report and the adjustment to the legislation to be done so that we could come to Parliament. It therefore means that the work that we must do really and truly has to happen between now and the bulk of it must be completed between now and Monday. And that is why Friday becomes such a very vitally important day in the life of this committee. So, having said all of that, colleagues, I think that we can now have a motion for the suspension for this evening, and that we reconvene on Friday morning at 10 a.m. sharp. Moved by Minister Ford and seconded by Senator Sands. I am grateful. We stand suspended.